I want to thank everyone for coming here. I know it's a great day outside. The sun is shining, it's warm, but you're people after my own heart that you're actually in here in a dark, shadowy room talking about books. So yeah, this is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's like the essential of writing and reading, isn't it? You know when you're like a kid and your parents are saying, right, why didn't you go outside? Why didn't you go outside? No, in here, in the dark with my comics. And here we are now. That's how it evolves. So
we just need a big bag of like Doritos and a can of Mountain Dew, right?
Right. You see, this is where that big divide called the Atlantic gets in the way. I kind of vaguely know this Mountain Dew thing, and Doritos. Right, in Britain, Doritos have only like appeared in the last like 10 years.
Yeah, well, you actually can't eat Doritos unless you're under the age of 17. Otherwise, it just shuts down your metabolism.
Right, okay.
You can't eat that kind of food.
Thanks for the health warning. Right, brilliant. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'm Christopher John Farley. I'm the author of this book, Game World, available in hardcover, softcover, digital download. I'll even talk it out for you if you want to hear it. It'll take a couple hours. We're here to talk about heroes and heroes' quests and children's fiction. So if you're here to talk about that, you're in the right place. I've written a number of books. I just had a movie at the Tribeca Film Festival about the life of James Brown that I produced. But this book was probably the most difficult book I've ever written. A bit about my background. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. Anyone here been to Kingston, been to Jamaica? Hands up. No one here has been to Jamaica? What's going on? All right, that's what I'm talking about. You're right there, great. So I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, grew up in upstate New York, which is why I have no accent and I can't even fake it at all.
You have an accent.
Oh, you think you have an accent? I left when I was a month old. So
no, you have an accent.
I have an upstate New York accent.
Yeah, that still counts.
And you have
to me, I'm the one without the accent.
Yeah, you're the one with the accent from Britain. Okay. I can't fake a Jamaican accent. I wish I could, but I can't. I would sound like someone from Cool Runnings. The Americans who were in that. And we don't want to do that. It's not right. After upstate New York, I went to Harvard and sort of got my love. One of the places that helped spark my love of writing was being on the Harvard Lampoon, which is housed in this big mock Flemish castle, and you hang around with a lot of guys and women who are all into writing and humor, and I took that with me later and went on to work for Time Magazine as a critic, and wrote a book called My Favorite War, which is sort of kind of like MASH, but with journalists instead of doctors, and the Gulf War instead of the Korean War, and published a book recently on the life of Bob Marley called Before the Legend, The Rise of Bob Marley. But all that led me up to this book. I thought, let me just knock off a kid's book in between writing my more serious adult books. And it turns out writing a kid's book is more difficult than writing an adult book because, adults will read your whole book and then tell you it stinks. Kids will read the first paragraph and go, this stinks. I got Xboxes to play. I got places to go. I got things to do. And so it took me years and years of revision, of talking to kids, of focus groups with 8-year-olds, and you haven't lived until you've been in a focus group with 8-year-olds from your neighborhood, none of whom will hold back about how much they detest your work. And so I did that for 7 years before I finally published this book, Game World. And one reason I did it is because as a kid, I loved fantasy fiction. I loved, J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. But I always imagined a lot of the people in there were black, were people of color, and they're always talking about the Dark Lords. If I get Dark Lords, that sounds like me. Sounds like maybe my uncle. But of course, when I saw the films, I thought, oh, they're not really talking about me. They're talking about some other thing, and we're not really in these books. And I always thought it was weird that fantasies are supposed to sort of open up your horizons, that they're so constrained and they're so narrow and they're only about certain people. And I thought, people really deserve the opportunity to sort of dream in color. And so I thought, let me write a book where the people in the book kind of look like people in my son's classrooms and my daughter's classrooms, and open up the world of fantasy somewhat. Because I love those books, but I wanted to also draw from those books. A lot of those books draw in the midst of the old world of Europe, and I love those books, and I love visiting Europe. But I thought, why not write a book that draws in the midst of the New World and the Caribbean, and there's a whole mythology and legends that my grandparents used to tell me growing up, and I can put those into the book. And I had the story that I wanted to tell. The book's about a group of kids who one kid in particular, Dylan, who's a great video game player. Pretty much all he has going on in his life. He's got ADHD. He's got his about to lose his apartment with his family. He's broke. But the one thing he's going on in his life is a great video game player. And the game he plays turns out to be real, and he's sucked into this world where he's sort of trying to find his sister who's been lost in this world, and he meets up with a bunch of other wild characters and characters out of Jamaican myth, and that's kind of where the fun begins. And it was a story that I've been burning to tell for a while, to capture some of the myths that I heard growing up and put them into book form, and that's how I wound up at Game World. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarwat, who will tell you more about his book and his background.
Actually, it's really... I'll just pick up one of the points that you made about heroes that one feels reflect, oneself. For me, my favourite movie as a kid, the one that was sort of almost just completely changed my world, was watching the original Disney Jungle Book. Yeah, you know the one, don't you? And of course, first of all, it is probably Disney's best movie, but also for a little brown kid, seeing a little brown kid being the hero up on the screen was just blew my mind. And it's one of those things that was just like parked there for about 30 years. And then, as Suzanne said, I did a fairly traditional career role. As a kid, I was mad on comics, absolutely mad on comics. Mainly DC. I don't know if you're where you are on the DC Marvel thing.
Yeah, DC Marvel, it's an eternal battle.
It is an eternal
struggle.
battle. Yeah. Between great DC characters and the rest. Johnny come latelys. So yeah, huge.
X-Men. Sorry.
Right. We'll carry on this discussion in the green room. Chris. Grew up a huge fan of superheroes, and the other thing that I was a gigantic fan of is I really, really loved reading the Greek myths, because as a kid, pretty much that was the only mythology that was available for children. Yeah, it was all the Greek myths. There was Norse mythology as well, but very, very much secondary. So as I grew older, got into the traditional fantasy stuff, the books that I was really keen on, of course I read Lord of the Rings, but have you read any of the Michael Moorcock books? Anyone here? Right, the Eternal Champion?
Ends very depressingly.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what happens, but...
But the Michael Moorcock Eternal Champion books, for me, were the things that made me think, wow, this is the sort of thing that I want to be doing one day. But career-wise, parents, we're not going to have any son of ours going off and doing comics. You have to get a real job. And so I became an engineer, which, I'll be honest, I hated. Yeah. Where to begin? I won't. I hated it. And it got to a point, after working in it for very many years, there are advantages to being an engineer. One of the main ones is you get a chance to work overseas. And actually, I worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years, and that's when I thought, right, when my engineering contract ended, I packed my bags, decided to go travelling. My plan was to go from Hong Kong in China all the way back to Britain overland. And I think that was all the stuff that happened to me over that period. It opened my eyes to the vast amount of Oriental Asian, South Asian mythology that was out there, that was so incredible, so vivid. My family comes from India, so we're South Asian, so I can just about stumble through with Hindi, although it's like with a really embarrassing English accent, like everything I say is with it. Anyway, so travelling around China is great, but there is a disconnect because you can't speak the language. You don't really understand, so you're still going there very much as an outsider. But with travelling around India, I had enough of the language that I could speak to the locals, and enough from my parents that I recognised bits of it. But then I was there for quite a long while, and it just built up this huge back catalogue of experience. For example, right, who here's been to India? I know you have. Right, fantastic. Okay, great. Right, as Chris says, there's this North European slant on fantasy, The thing about India is that it's actually a fantasy world for real. If you've got the Himalayas, you have the most epic mountains that New Zealand could only dream of being. Yeah. You've got the Thar Desert, you've got Jaisalmer. There is this walled desert city, which is as cool as it possibly can be. Yeah, you're just approaching it. It's like I went on the camel trek around there, and it was like that's like my Lawrence of Arabia thing. But camel treks when it's 46 degrees. Sorry, I do metric. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. Right, really brain-meltingly hot. Yeah.
It's about 130.
130, yes. Seriously, 2 days on the back of camel when it's 130, yeah, novelty really wears off. Yeah. But it was like, why isn't anyone writing about this sort of stuff? You do have it, certainly in the adult world, but definitely not in the children's literary world. Britain, as you know, did rule India for 200 years. In Britain, we have so much of the stuff that let's face it, we stole it from the Indians. It just happens that way. So when I realised I wanted to be a writer, the Mowgli thing was the biggest catalyst. I wanted to write about a brown kid being a hero for once, yeah, brown eyes instead of green-eyed heroes. So I knew I was going to be writing a series set in India. What was brilliant was doing the research. Most of it I could do in London. Of course, I did go out to India to do the research, which is tax deductible. So your next flight to Jamaica, just make sure that's what you put down. Research. Right, so you've got Varanasi, that's the holy city in India. It looks like an Indiana Jones site, yeah. Ancient temples, little narrow alleyways, weaving, winding all over the place. There's the River Ganges running by, and if you get cremated in Varanasi, you go immediately to heaven. So that is the place to die. And that is where... Actually, I ate somebody's grandmother. Do you want to hear the eating the grandmother story? Right, anyway, so I thought, right, I might as well get the authentic experience.
Can we put that up to a vote? Who wants to hear the eating the grandmother story? I want to make sure.
Yeah, they do on that side.
I think the A's carry the day.
Right, okay, fantastic. Right, so I was like exploring the back alleyways, and I knew that there's one of the ghats is where they carry out the funerals, and of course there are these big massive cremations, and it's fascinating because the different types of wood have different costs, yeah, and sandalwood is the most expensive because it's fragrant, but it's really, really expensive. So what they do is they just sprinkle sandalwood over the body, and because they're little narrow alleyways, you have no idea what's around the corner. So I literally went around the corner with my ice cream because it was hot, and they were burning their grandmother, and the wind blew a lot of the ashes and the smoke in my direction, and I had a crunchy ice cream. Because it was hot, I was determined to finish, and so I did.
Hold on. This is your grandmother's...
Not my grandmother,
okay.
Somebody else's grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't be having ice cream at my own grandmother's.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Why are you having ice cream at that? And if anyone's...
I'd just be bizarre.
Okay.
All right, fine.
Whatever.
Yeah. Oh, and it wasn't my grandmother's funeral. Yeah, that'd be so rude if I was there with the
ice cream,
handing out sweets or something like that. Right, anyway, so that was the research. But no, children's fiction for some reason has missed India, and that's really what I wanted to write about. My hero, Ash. It's funny, because reading your book, there's a lot of similarities between Dylan and Ash. Yeah, the sibling thing is key in both of our plots. Both Ash and Dylan have really irritating, high-functioning younger sisters. Yeah, which is that part of your growing up experience?
It's a universal condition.
Yeah.
Everyone who has a little sister finds that they're more high-functioning than they are if they're a boy.
That's exactly
that's the way it goes.
Yeah, and so Ash is, he's like a geek. That's what a modern kid. He's 13, but I want to explore the Indian myths, but also bring in the superhero element,
which we'll discuss
really
in
cool.
detail.
Yeah. So my book. Oh, sorry, can I have a copy of here?
Which is excellent. I've read the book.
Oh,
terrific.
Thank you very much. And I return the compliment. Yours is rather epic as well. Savage Fortress is the first of the Ash books. There's Ash, there's Lucky, there's a massive crocodile demon chasing them. It really is as exciting as the cover would imply. That's kind of like the cremation I went to, but without the big crocodile demon.
And no ice cream.
Yeah, and no. I told him put ice cream on the picture, but he took it. cover artists.
Ice cream makes everything better.
Yeah, exactly.
Informations.
Yep. They certainly more crunchy. All right. Very much for the same reasons CJ has written Game World, I wanted to have characters that kind of reflect a bit more of modern children. I think in Britain, certainly one in 5 children now come from an ethnic minority, and I live in London, where it's probably about 50% now.
Well, I think it's important to note also that because there's been a huge campaign this weekend, you've probably seen it, hashtag We Need Diverse Books. It's been all over, it's been trending on the internet for the last couple of days. And one thing that's important to point out is that fewer than 3% of kids' books actually feature African American protagonists, and the numbers are worse for Indian American protagonists, for Native American protagonists, for Asian protagonists, for others. For some reason, kids literature, kids books are the most segregated part of American literature, and I think the same is probably true in Britain.
Yeah.
And what's bad about that? Because sometimes when I talk about my book and I talk about the diverse heroes in it, I got a look from some people like, geez, it seems like you're writing more, for a social experiment than writing literature. But, my impulse comes from the same impulse that drove Tolkien, where Tolkien wanted to write about Lord of the Rings because he thought that he wanted to sort of champion, what was going on in Britain, because he felt that Germany's mythology was stronger than Britain's at the time.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's good for all kids. I mean, I keep thinking, if Donald Sterling, the owner of the LA Clippers, maybe if he'd read more kids' books, diverse kids' books as a child, maybe it wouldn't be so messed up today. It sounds like a joke, a cheap joke, but I think, to a certain extent, people know that race is kind of a fiction, because it's not really rooted in any kind of biological fact. It's a social fiction we tell each other. So what better thing to combat that fiction than actual fiction? And so I think that by not having kids of all colors reading books about characters of all colors, we're really, I think, sapping something essential out of our kids. We're not giving the opportunity to understand people from a very early age.
I mean, I find this whole thing bizarre because, I've had exactly the same experience. I've had, I had this one bookseller, I kid you not, turn to me and say, right, I don't see the point of stocking your book because we've got no South Asians living in our village. Well, I thought, you've probably got no bloody hobbits living in your village, but I bet you're shifting a couple of copies of those. And what I find so strange is the attachment to literature, this colour bar, for the want of a better word. Nobody goes to the cinema and says, I'm not seeing that Will Smith movie because, I'm not black, I'm not going to be able to connect to it. So why is it that it seems to exist in children's book when it doesn't really exist anywhere else?
Well, it's also fascinating the fact that people can stretch their imaginations in certain ways and not in others. You talk about The Hobbit. I loved The Hobbit as a kid. Seeing the Hobbit movies, I'm thinking, there can't be any black hobbits. There can be dragons, there can be dwarves, there can be magicians, but a black hobbit is too much for you to possibly imagine. What is up with that? I still remember an anecdote that Whoopi Goldberg once told, that one reason she decided to join the whole Star Trek crew is because she always used to watch these futuristic things and go like, oh my gosh, in the future, we're not there. And that's kind of scary. Well, what happened? What happened to us? Yeah. And I feel the same way about fantasy books where, what kind of sick person, their idea of literary fun is to imagine a world in which we're not there. Yeah. What the heck is up with that? And that's not good for kids. And I think if we give kids these imaginary worlds that are populated with all kinds of people, all kinds of colors, rather than saying, "Oh, that's not realistic," realistic have these flying.
I think
it's something wrong about that. That's something we've got to stop.
You're quite right, because one of the criticisms is, but that's not realistic medieval. Yeah, so neither is the dragon. Yeah. And so why is this abstract line being drawn? And also historically. Medieval Europe wasn't like that. And so that's why I find so fascinating, because I come from a Muslim background. Having been born and brought up in Europe, I've actually been really fascinated about the Muslim penetration,
so to speak. But there was actually real penetration going on when they took over Spain.
Yes, exactly. So you had Spain ruled by a Muslim empire for 400 years. You had Russia ruled by the Mongolians for a good few hundred. Yeah. You had the Turks that came up to the gates of Vienna till about the 15th century. So the Ottoman Empire was huge and influential. Prior to that, of course, you go back to the Crusades. What I find I find irritating is the fact that the Crusade talk is always antagonistic. There's a huge amount of cross-cultural development as well during the Crusades. Lots of stuff went back and forth.
And during the Roman Empire.
The Renaissance wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the Arabs not just retaining Greek maths and science, but also developing it as well. So this fiction of the medieval world that fantasy writers use as the basis, is a bizarre fiction as well. It was never that black. It's never that white in the first place.
And look, it doesn't matter. It's a work of imagination, so you should feel free to do anything you want and cross any boundaries you want. One quote I have in my book from Picasso is, "Anything you can imagine is real." He said that once. I feel the same way in fiction. That you can. Who cares if black people weren't in some certain part of Europe, which probably isn't true anyways. You can imagine it, so why not imagine it? And I just find it so strange when artists draw a certain kind of cultural boundary around one certain thing of race and refuse to imagine beyond it.
Yeah.
These books, I think, are sort of a step in that direction.
I hope so.
And certainly your book, one thing I found fascinating about it is that, I love mythological books as a kid. Reading about Norse mythology, reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. I read those when I was in 4th or 5th grade. I started reading those books. I love those books, and I ended up taking 5 years of Latin in the Aeneid, which I thought was terrific. But though many kids can sort of name Norse gods, they can name Greek gods and Roman gods, they can't always name the gods who are sort of part of Indian tradition and Hindu tradition. And this book helps sort of explore some of them, sort of sets up a whole new sort of backdrop for kids' fantasy, which I really admire.
Yeah. What's curious is when I came up with the idea of the Ash series. Right. Who here's seen Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom? Right. Yeah, we all have. Right. I so supported the Thuggy cult. Okay, I just want to say that. Yeah, and so this is my literary riposte, as it were. Yeah, and so in this series, it's the rather than the American, the English archaeologist that is the big villain. There's even like my little running joke about the whip and fedora in book 2, and Ash gets recruited. Basically, he becomes an agent of Kali, so he's like the proto-thuggy hero. So that was, after watching Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, I realised there's something really bloody fundamentally wrong with this picture. And that, it's taken a while, but so Ash was very much, there's a catalyst in that I thought, I hate this movie on so many levels. And it's not just the bloody chilled monkey brains.
Well, it's funny. When I saw that movie as a kid, I went with 2 friends of mine who were South Asian. They were exchange students at the local college, and the language they speak. There's this whole scene where they eat all the insects.
Yeah.
And the language they speak there is it's a dialect that these kids actually spoke. And so when they saw it, they were so insulted because like, we don't eat live creatures and insects and worms, and they felt so insulted by that film.
I mean, it would have been embarrassing in a 1930s movie, and then it just anyway. But so that was my little but there is a strange, massive hole in children's fiction with regards to characters. I would just wish there was a better term, characters of colour or non-white. I don't know. There needs to be a better term for it.
I think the term is just it's the characters are very limited. It almost has nothing to do with colour. It's the fact that they're super limited.
Yes,
and you wonder what is going on with that.
Yeah. And there's also this. I don't know whether you've come across this. The idea that boys won't read girl characters, but girls will read boy characters. Which kind of like makes the Hunger Games sound a bit like, well, then how did that become successful?
Yeah,
so I think
people say that there are all these things that are accepted in the world of fiction as truisms that aren't really true.
Yeah.
And one of them is, boys aren't going to read about girl characters, and then you have a series like Divergent, which stars a strong female character. You have like the Hunger Games. There are many other examples. Kids will read anything if it's good. If it's arresting, if it grabs them, they'll read it. It has nothing to do with the gender. Everything to do with the publisher's limited idea on what people will actually read. If it's good, they'll read it. If you have a story, you'll read it. If it speaks to people's heart and experience, they'll read it. Has nothing to do with gender.
I feel we should be arguing over something instead of being agreeing.
Let's see.
Can we go back to the DC Marvel thing?
Are you a cricket fan?
Oh yeah, obviously I'm a cricket fan.
It so bores me. I don't get it. What's up with that?
It's a Zen thing. It's a bit like Keanu Reeves acting.
How do you come up with a sport that's even how do you come up with a sport that's even more boring than baseball? How do you do that? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Empire. I think that's no, it's a Zen thing.
Some disagreement right there.
Yeah. Anyway, that's because you just look. Again, I'll explain it. Sorry, you're about to explain cricket to him.
No,
are you the cricket fan?
I was going to ask you guys, what went into your process of like thinking about what had to be there in the hero's quest? Maybe there's some differences with regard to how you thought about constructing that quest for kids.
Right, that's an interesting question. Are you asking? Right. Are you asking about the hero quest? Right. There's the hero's journey, which is made famous by Christopher Farley and basically Star Wars and Joseph Campbell.
Exactly.
Do you want to talk?
Or
right.
whatever.
Right. Actually, can I ask? Right. Who here is interested in writing as a career? Okay, because there's an issue here whether we could talk slightly shoppy technical.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, that's about 50%. All right then.
Well, obviously, if you're interested in writing as a career, you've probably read, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell. Everyone sort of knows the basic points he made. The fact that there's a sort of monomyth out there that a lot of people, that all these cultures draw from, and a lot of writers draw from, a lot of religions draw from. That a hero has to go through certain steps to become sort of an iconic hero. One of them is that he goes into a different world of some sort. That he faces some sort of struggle or battle. That after winning that battle, he brings something magical or something different back to the real world, and he sort of bestows his boon on the people that he came from. That's basically the hero's quest as outlined by Joseph Campbell. And I think every writer sort of faces the choice there. They can sort of follow that footprint, that blueprint, because it obviously works. I think it's true to some extent. Or they can look for ways to sort of subvert that, because you don't want to sound like every other book that's been out there since the dawn of time. Is there any other way of telling a story that's different from that story?
I think the issue is feeling that is the magic ingredient, where the only magic ingredient, I think, in writing is going to be your personal passion. Yeah, that's what's going to separate you from everybody else, right? And so I've attended writing workshops, and I've run writing workshops where people think that, right, if I follow rules A to, you're going to say A to Z, right? Sounds wrong. A to Z. A to Z. A to Z. Right, you follow rules A to Z, you will have a novel, screenplay. I think actually, personally, I think a lot of damage has been done, especially with there's loads of screenplay writing courses that use the Joseph Campbell rule. They've become rules. I think that's the mistake. I don't think there should ever be rules. There should be guidelines. Maybe maybe it's different for screenplay writing. I've never really attempted that. But you could, right, the hero's journey is basically your personal development, yeah, isn't it? It's how we become better, enlightened, whatever. We struggle, we fail, we struggle, we fail, we struggle, we succeed, and we become better, yeah. It's the path to enlightenment, it's the path to bringing the mammoth home for dinner. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's a good idea to have all these things in mind and know some of the points that other sort of authors and myth studiers have said. But in the end, I always sort of draw a little inspiration from. I'm sure everyone's read, letters to a young poet by Rilke, where at one point he's saying, you're asking for advice to this young poet that's writing to him, and he says that, in the end, you have to sort of dig into yourself and stop asking these questions and dig into a deep place in yourself and decide, what you want to write and if you're a writer or not. And it's the same for anyone who's sort of writing a book like this, a kid's book or a hero's journey book. You can ask all the questions you want. You should be very aware of what's been written in the field before. But in the end, you really have to sort of look into yourself and find a deep place and think, okay, what's my story? What do I really want to say? What do I really have to relate to readers in the end, and tell that story? And maybe it'll end up following the same pattern, maybe not. But I do know if you sort of follow a paint-by-numbers kind of way, it will probably show to readers. it will probably show to the people that you want to attract your book, and certainly it will show to yourself.
It'll be a horrible experience for you, yeah? I mean, you talked about how long it took you to write Game World, yeah? Do you really want to spend that amount of time doing something that you feel nothing for, yeah? You might as well go off and, you know, be an engineer. Sorry, oh God, there are engineers in this audience, right? Who here's an engineer? Phew. Dodge that bullet.
Because even after I sort of spent 7 years writing this book, and I was talking to all these kids and getting their feedback, in the end, the story I wanted to tell was a story that I felt I needed to tell, and it wasn't dictated by like the kids in the neighborhood, or my son reading the book, or his friends reading the book. They all gave me great advice, but in the end, it's just you alone with your computer, thinking, what's really going to speak to me? What's really going to speak to the fears that I have, the concerns that I have? What's the story that's driving this? So after all of that, the hero's journey is really something that's deep within you, and not some pattern that you just want to follow.
Sorry, I agree. I wish I didn't.
But we can go back to the cricket thing.
Yeah, okay, right. 2 teams, 11.
One Direction, what's up with that?
Oh, no.
What is up with that?
Look, I'm well beyond the One Direction target audience.
Just trying to find some areas of disagreement.
But do we want to go into the superhero thing? Right, well, actually, but it's kind of, for me, the overlap between superheroes and mythology is gigantic anyway. Right, beyond the standard fact that you've got Thor in both camps. I think that's actually what appealed to me about the DC heroes more than the Marvel, is because the DC heroes are of a mythic size, yeah, while the Marvel are a bit more, and I don't mean this as an insult, more soap opera-y, yeah. So with the Marvel characters, they work best when they're actually more about the day-to-day concerns, yeah. Like Spider-Man being the best example. How can you be a teenager and a superhero? The X-Men is about the family dynamics as much as it is about their struggle for inequality, yeah? But the superheroes like Superman and Batman work on far more mythic levels. Like, you have to have, this Hades type Batman versus, the Dionysus type of Joker, yeah? And like Superman is a godlike figure.
But in your own book, you quote from Spider-Man, great power comes great responsibility, and make a joke about that.
Yeah, I'm not
against. I'm scoring 1 point for me, right there. Yeah. Right at the end of your book.
Yeah, and then actually, I think it's in book. Right, in book 2, I have my Superman. Right, in like Kill Bill 2. Bill goes on about Superman. There's this big monologue about Superman. I can't really remember the details. Ash likewise has this monologue, this idea about why does Superman bother being Clark Kent? Because he can be saving so many more people, yeah, if he just is Superman 24/7, yeah, instead of sitting there in the office of Daily Planet just watching dancing cats on YouTube like everybody else, yeah. And so realising actually you need to have that downtime of being normal, away from the responsibilities of being God. So that's 1 point for me in the next book. Yeah. And then I've got a really cool Batman joke in book 3. There's a couple of Doctor Who things.
My problem with the whole DC Marvel thing, the reason why I tend to like the Marvel comic books better, is because they're rooted in reality. Spider-Man's a teenager that just happens to have these powers. But there's still, when he puts on the suit, though, he is engaged in sort of these big mythic struggles against huge, big villains. I mean, I never really, I never really got the point of a Superman, because basically he's got such incredible power. Who can really defeat him in the end? So it becomes sort of ridiculous. They have to come up with ways to figure out, that the screenwriters have to labor to come up with ways to make stories that villains that he can actually have any kind of chance against.
You see, what's so irritating is I'm about to agree with you on this, up to a point. Right, the thing is, the Silver Age Superman. Right, okay, sorry, it's going to be such a geek conversation.
The Silver Age Superman.
Right, okay, so in the very, very early 1930s Superman, he was just an exceptional human being.
I think I should have tape around my glasses.
Yes. Right, back in the early days. Superman was just an exceptional human being. He couldn't fly, he just leapt huge distances, was just much stronger. And so his abilities were quite downscale, and then he would be like fighting gangsters, and the battles would be low key. But then, you know, as time progressed, they just started accumulating. And for me, it was heat vision. Right, I don't get heat vision. Right, I can imagine a superhuman. Right, he's got exceptional eyesight, so that would be telescopic.
They just throw that in there. Like
yeah, so they just started throwing stuff randomly in there. Yeah, and so then by the mid-70s, 80s, he could turn back time and absolutely everything. Right, so in Crisis in Infinite Earths was DC's attempt to reboot Superman. That was about 1986, and that was to try and downgrade him. But then it just starts creeping up all over again. And you know, if we're on the subject of big mistakes in comics, what about the Clone Saga in Spider-Man?
Well, let's go back to turning.
Sorry, was that a bit dirty? Was that a bit below the belt?
I'll go back to turning back time in Superman. I mean, he flies around the Earth, and so time gets turned back. But isn't this time still the same on the Moon or Mars? And people can look up and go like the astrological signs are all messed up. I mean, does that sound plausible to you?
No.
No, it doesn't. Okay. Just want to make sure. I thought it was just me.
Right. Okay. Right. Shall we start at? Right. Okay. This is just going to be a slagging match. We're grown-ups.
But here's one thing about, and this is one reason I wrote this book, to get it back to the books, is that, you know, I do think we're engaged in sort of superhero overload right now. We were talking about
completely.
that. I mean, because of the success of the Batman series, huge billion-dollar franchise, you know, Marvel decided they need to get in the game too, and so the X-Men series has been ramped up. You know, of course, they've come out. They're coming out. The Avengers has come out, and now DC's announced they're going to come up with a Justice League series. And you know, these characters, to a certain extent, some of them have some depth to them, but for the most part, I think we can agree that most of the characters lack the depth that you'll see in good books and good children's novels. Yeah. And when kids get caught up into the world of comic books, some comic books are terrific. Some graphic novels are great. I mean, Art Spiegelman, he's fantastic. You know, Mara Jane Sartrapi, fantastic. But a lot of the sort of mainstream comic books, it can be a very empty, numbing experience, which is hammered home by these franchises that are really just about getting people in seats and not about entertaining them in any kind of deep level.
Because a few years ago, with the success of Twilight, there was quite a few of the paranormal romance movies came out. Right. So I think what's probably going to happen is give this cycle another couple of years. There'll be the Batman and Robin movie will come out, and it will be stone dead all over again.
Bring Robin back.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I think we're just in that tsunami of superheroes right now, but sooner or later it's going to run out, and I think that's actually for the good, because there's only a small group of iconic heroes, I think, in DC and Marvel, and the fact that they're now just...
Is Daredevil one of them?
Right, there is... I have a love-hate relationship with Frank Miller, basically Holy Terror, right? Say no more, And so... right.
Didn't miss that.
Didn't you ever see it?
No. I mean, it was the movie.
No, right. Frank Miller to me.
I saw the movie Daredevil with Ben Affleck.
Right, Frank Miller is a really famous. He's like there's Alan Moore and Frank Miller. They are the gods of the comic world. And I adored Frank Miller because he wrote The Dark Knight Returns, which is basically where all the Batman reboots have begun from. It was a 4-issue miniseries back in 1986. Blew everybody away. That was when the Renaissance in comics happened in the English-speaking world.
And the tone that he set kind of rebooted the way people sort of envision superheroes in general.
But he's developed what I can basically describe as a Islamophobia. And he wrote a series a couple of years ago that's Holy Terror. And you're reading it, dig it out, you're reading it thinking there's going to be some satirical point, but then it's not. It's just basically hate comic.
And that speaks to the other problem that a lot of these comic book films have, is that although we're seeing an explosion of comic books, even minor villains and minor characters are getting their own possibly their own movies. Like Scarlett Johansson's character Black Widow might get her own movie at some point, according to some.
Although it's about time they had a female superhero.
Yeah, but that's the problem. Is that right now there are almost no female superheroes with their own sort of franchises. There are almost no superheroes of color with their own franchises. A couple that they might bring on board later, And so again, you have this explosion of money and power and franchising, and yet it still reflects only a small slice of the human experience. And it's quite draining and probably not that good at building up kids' imaginations about what the world is about and showing them ways to be heroes. I mean, you watch comic books, movies, and if you're a kid of color, you're like, I'm not a hero in this story.
You can only be the sidekick.
You can be a sidekick, or maybe you can be a supervillain, but you can't really be one of the core members of the superhero team. I'm hoping that'll change soon.
Although the first Blade was badass, wasn't it?
It was pretty good.
I love that movie.
So, but it's a problem with this heroic journey that right now only certain people can take it, and you hope it changes soon.
Mm. But shall we talk a little bit about your mythology?
Yes.
Because actually I found this fascinating comparison. Right, I, completely immersed myself in Indian mythology for about 20 years before I finally came around to writing this. So for me, talking about Kali, Vishnu and everything just seemed very, very normal, talking about Thor and Loki. So I found it odd when I met readers, booksellers, so I just don't get it. And I thought, yeah, it's just really, really super obvious. However, I've admitted this to Chris already, I've never read anything about Jamaican mythology until I read Chris's book, which I thought was hysterical as a satire. So obviously that National Lampoon thing is like, you see, I try and put my engineering into my book.
The National Lampoon was the magazine that came out that licensed the name. Harvard Lampoon was a humor organization on campus.
Right.
The National Lampoon is something different.
Right, fine.
They put out the vacation movies and.
There is a really hysterical satire running through game world that I don't think children get, but certainly the adult readers. I just found that so funny. But I found it quite. I'll be honest. I found it quite hard work keeping track of all the supernatural characters because they're not from a background that I'm familiar with, like the Iron Lions, etc. And I found it an exercise. I found it a really fascinating exercise. What's brilliant is it's made me realize, oh my God, there's all this extra cool stuff out there that I might end up borrowing at some point. Yeah, but there is a curious. Right, I as a reader am as bad as most. I read what I like. Yeah. And so I don't read as widely as I should, especially in as bad as in being a writer myself. And so sometimes I think, right, I can understand why a reader says, well, I like that, that's just what I'm going to stick with, yeah. But how did you, as a writer, persuade, when you do visits and things, what is the response you get from children who say, right, I just don't get it? How do you react to that?
Yeah, I've never had a kid say he or she didn't get it, right. Which is great, because, I took part of my inspiration from what happened to Bob Marley. Back in the 60s, here he is with dreadlocks, a hairstyle that nobody had seen outside of Jamaica, playing a regional form of music, reggae, that people weren't playing outside of the island of Jamaica, talking about overthrowing the system, talking about Duppies, the song Duppy Conqueror, speaking in patois and no one can understand him outside of the island of Jamaica, and still saying, screw it, I'm going to have a worldwide global hit anyways, which is exactly what he did. And so I think when you're telling a story that you're passionate about, that has a purpose to it, some of the trappings of language, of culture, of talking about things people maybe don't know about, all that falls away, and the essence of it comes through, and they'll eventually get the rest of it. The end of the last century, Time magazine picked Bob Marley's, because I was there at the time, picked Exodus as the album of the century. The New York Times picked Legend, his greatest hits album, as one of the albums of the 20th century. The BBC picked One Love as the song of the century. And if you listen to that album, those songs, there's a lot of patois going on, a lot of stuff from Jamaican culture people might not get if they're not from Jamaica, and yet it all works because the passion is there, the rhythm is there, the purpose is there, and it all comes through. At the end of the book, I did put a glossary in there.
Yeah,
Tolkien has a glossary, in his books too. Just so people can sort of learn more, and a reading list of things they can find out more about. But kids get it because they get the passion, They get the newness of it, they get the freshness of it, and they want to take a trip. Kids want to explore. They don't want to just see places they've seen before. They open up a book because they want to do something different. I find when I visit a lot of schools around New York to just read from the book and talk to kids, and I find the kids that are reading anyways are an odd group of kids anyways, because they're not just playing Xbox. They want to have new experiences. That's why they're reading books and not playing on their PlayStation 4s. That's why they're reading books and not just watching TV shows. That's why they're reading books and not out there doing something else, because they want to have new experiences. They want to open up their worlds. And so rather than sort of me saying, you know what, this is a little too Caribbean for kids, I'm just going to give them the full thing, have fun with it, take them to a new place. And I think that every kid who's read it so far has been sort of along for the ride.
Right. So with regards to the editing, because I will admit, Savage Fortress went through a lot of edits between me and my agent before we sent it to the publisher, because my agent just didn't understand it. And there was this whole thing about, right, actually I will admit, some of it I did write in phonetic Hindi. So she may have had a point in not understanding some of it, which was, actually it's funny because this is part of the PEN America thing. It's because Salman Rushdie is a big hero of mine, and so when I got an invite to turn up to PEN America, I fantasized it was a personal invite because his name is out at the bottom. Yeah. However, I read Midnight Children many years ago, and he puts in a lot of Hindi slang that just makes the whole book sublimely funny.
Do you know Diaz does the same thing with his book? That he's just a fantastic writer. I mean, there's Elvish slang in Tolkien, and no one
nobody bats an eyelid over
works
it.
for me.
Yeah. And so so I don't know, maybe this is a personal thing. I just found the entire what is the balancing act between introducing a readership to a new world setting that's not North European, something they can automatically fall into without sort of losing them. And it's a really interesting hearing you speak about it. I think maybe I was being slightly too conservative or slightly too wary, because I wanted. This book focuses on the Ramayana. There's two great Indian myths, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Ramayana is about the great battle between Prince Rama and the demon king Ravana. Mahabharata is the battle between two sides of an epic family. And originally my book dealt with both myths, but it was decided with my agent we only wanted to concentrate on one, because otherwise people were thinking, how do all of these characters meet up? And they don't really. So that's really interesting to hear. So you didn't feel inhibited thinking, well, maybe I should cut this out because I might lose some of the readers.
No, because I also drew inspiration from other pop culture releases that were mythic and told another culture story, and that every culture could see themselves in it. One of the great examples of that is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That's a movie that was released in Mandarin. Didn't have any white actors in it, and yet made over $100 million at the American market because it was something fresh. People hadn't seen that kind of wire fighting before. They hadn't seen those actors, many of those actors before, and they were just caught up in the beauty and the passion of the story and didn't care it was in another language.
However, can I riposte this? Then you had Slumdog Millionaire, again, no Caucasian actors, all completely Indian actors, although some of them were British Indian, however, directed by a Scotsman, And so I always found it curious. I wonder how it had been received if it had been directed by a South Asian, even if it had been exactly the same movie. And when it came out, I thought, this is brilliant. Maybe this is going to start a surge towards stories set in India, but it didn't. However, what's fascinating is with Crouching Dragon, there's still a very big demand for that style of movie. Even if it's not directed at the Western audience, the Western audience goes and seeks it out. However, the Bollywood thing has still remained very regional. There hasn't been that crossover. And I'm working with an Indian comic company right now who are wanting to try and produce, for example, as comic fans, manga has crossed over gigantically and nobody bats an eyelid over it. But So there are Indian publishers and comic companies trying to do that sort of thing.
But you're certainly right. But that movie, Slumdog Millionaire, did produce a crossover star in the form of A.R. Rahman, who did, of course, the great music for Slumdog Millionaire. I would sing some of it for you right now, but you'd probably drive me off stage.
I can do the one dancing in the back if you're willing to give it a go. Right.
What's interesting about it, I did an interview with him, and he said one thing after that movie, he decided to stop doing Western movies that had an Indian theme to it because he didn't want to pigeonhole himself. Right. And he ended up doing the music for a lot of other films that had nothing to do with India, that just wanted to have his talents as a composer and songwriter. He's obviously had a huge career for himself. He's doing another Indian themed movie coming out very soon that falls in some of the pitfalls you talked about. It's called $1 Million Arm. Right. It's about John Hamm is a white agent who goes to India to help convert 2 Indian athletes into baseball players.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually based on a true story of 2 guys who actually ended up trying out for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and A.R. Rahman did the music for it. And we'll see how that does at the box office. But you're right, there is this aesthetic out there that, sure, we'll take this other culture, but we want to make sure there's some white person in there so the mainstream culture can understand it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think doing that all the time, just reflexively, I think it sells the audience short. I think audiences are smart enough to want to take anything if it's good, and they don't necessarily need to have that guide into the story if the story itself is worthwhile. I think that's more a thing that Hollywood executives like to do, and some publishing houses, and not something that the audiences out there require for their enjoyment. You know, another example of that is
to get the money coughed up by somebody, isn't it? That's why you have to have Tom Cruise as the Last Samurai and Keanu as the 47th Ronin. God, did anyone see the 47 Ronin?
Yeah, I think once you've seen the first 46, you don't need to see the 47th.
Right.
I'm
a huge Keanu fan. I can't wait for Bill and Ted 3.
It was a bomb at the box office too.
Yeah, you can really tell why.
But you know,
see, we're agreeing again.
No, but you know, talking back to the whole mythology issue, though, I do think, and what was great about your book is that it did draw from this new, to many readers, tapestry of mythology that's out there, and I think that that's something that kids' literature needs to do more of. There are many other cultures out there beyond Norse, English, Greek, Roman mythology. That people can draw from. And obviously Rick Riordan has made a fortune drawing from Greek and Roman mythology. He also has a series that draws from Egyptian mythology.
Okay, his next one's going to be Norse.
Yeah, but I think that the other folks, the other mythologies out there to draw from that I think kids would eat up if someone just placed in front of them. They want to be, the kids who are readers want to be immersed in these new worlds.
What's fascinating, I don't know Rick, but he's been an early supporter of the Ash books. So frankly, if it's good enough for Ash, it's good enough for you lot. If it's good enough for Rick, it's good enough for you lot. And he's also been, I can't remember the name of the writer. He's writing about African mythology. Mine's gone blank on it right now. Sorry? Okafor, that's it. So what's great is that you've got, I talked about this at another event I've just come from, within mid-grade especially, all the authors, we all feel that we're all in the same boat. It's all about promoting great literature to readers. My earlier series was written for YA, so for teens and upwards, but can I slightly diverge about literacy in general?
Yeah, sure.
I work with a literacy charity out in England called Beanstalk, and it's really shocking the extent of the lack of reading ability amongst children even now. And there was a statistic about, I think roughly about 50% of people in prison are fundamentally illiterate. Yeah. And so when you're writing for an older audience, you've got the converts. The battle's already been won. Yeah. When you start writing for the younger ages, when you're writing for young children, you're writing books that the adults are reading to them. Yeah. So that's not the same dynamic. When you get to mid-grade, that's where you're building the next generation of readers. Yeah. And so one of the reasons I wrote Ash as mid-grade rather than YA is because I wanted that to happen at the younger end, rather than saying, right, they're already fans of reading books, I'll just, pick up another one. I think there's something important, talking about the race thing. I've gone to a lot of schools in Britain with large South Asian populations, and for them, being a writer is not even on their radar. It's not a career path that they would expect a person like them to follow. And part of that I completely understand, because my parents felt the same. Within South Asian communities, there's a very big pressure to follow a proper profession, and it still exists even now. And I think maybe it's an immigrant thing that you feel, right, you need to be in some sort of established career if you're going to earn money rather than
that's true. I mean, I was at a school in Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago, and afterwards, one kid came up to me and said, like, so, how much money do you make as a writer? And so, I thought, should I tell him? Should I not? Because sometimes I will just tell people how much money I make, just if they ask, just so I want to give them a sense of this is what happens. But it felt like it wasn't coming from a place where it was good for me to sort of say that. So I said, it's not really for the money. It's because I love books. And he goes like, okay. And I see Will's turn. This kid was about 12 years old. And he goes like, what kind of car did you drive here?
That's the other way around it.
And so I think he saw my Honda Pilot and realized how much money writers actually make. Yes?
I'm curious what kind of advice you got from the 8-year-olds who were your focus group. What did they tell you that they wanted to see?
Well, I could get great advice. One bit of advice I got early on from a lot of the young girls who read the book was, develop the girl characters in certain ways, build them up more. A lot of the boys who read the book at that age would tell me, okay, a kid wouldn't really say that. This is the way I would say it. A kid wouldn't have that particular concern. Cut out that reference to the Strokes. We're not listening to that. Stuff like that. So it's very, very helpful stuff in terms of maybe getting the tone exactly right. Because otherwise, the whole book would have just been about the Strokes. So
that would have been a good book.
Yeah, I would have read it, but probably not many 12 to 14-year-olds. Yes.
I'd like to suggest a perspective which is something that comes with age. Okay. As somebody who grew up in the late 50s reading comic books and was very passionate about fantasy at that time, and saw for the first time, let's say in 1965, when Gene Roddenberry produced a show called The Lieutenant, and you had strong black characters for the first time, okay? And then, of course, you saw Uhura, and you saw Chekhov, and you saw Sulu, right? You saw these people that we didn't know, right? And there they were on TV. And fast forward, I'm a children's book author now, okay? So I wrote some books, one of which, was about the young Jimi Hendrix, which was published in 2010. I just sold a book about Billie Holiday and the creation of the song Strange Fruit. For me, who grew up at a time when people were probably still being lynched, and you could not openly be gay or black or brown or red or yellow very easily, I can look at this and see tremendous progress. One of my illustrators last night is a very well-known, we just did a book that's coming out next year about the two guys who created bebop, okay? Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, right? He's Chinese. He's 83 years old. He's been in the business for 50 years, and we were talking about what you're talking about, your frustration, but not just about color of characters, about ideas and getting books out there that are a little different, okay? And he said, in the 50 years that I've been in the business, I've seen it move an inch. That's the way human society and culture works. But what I'm suggesting to you is that that inch is a very big deal. And maybe you can only see it when you get to be a certain age and you've been, I'm not a guru or anything. My point is that I'm over 60 now. And in the last few years, I can see that it does take a long time for things to happen. You guys wouldn't be on this stage for me 30 or 40 years ago. And when I was a kid, nobody would have come here to see you.
See, I think I take your point, but I have to say I disagree. And here's why. I think people have this illusion that progress is actually happening because time is moving forward, when that's not always the case. For example, 40, 50 years ago, during when Richard Wright was on the top of the New York Times bestseller list. So was Ralph Ellison. We have no black male authors who are on that level today. Again, it's taking a step back from where we were decades ago. Let me finish. Also, the Children's Cooperative Book Center, which monitors the number of minority characters in children's books, they've been doing this for 20 years. And actually the numbers are worse slightly today than they were 20 years ago when they began monitoring the numbers. They've slipped down. It's less than 3% when it's a little bit over 3% 20 years ago. So we're slipping back. So certainly you can point anecdotally to things and say, oh, it's better in these certain ways. But actually, we haven't really been moving forward literature-wise in terms of progress. We may have a black president, and we may have a black president that has pursued best-selling books. But unfortunately, the reality on the ground, socially, when it comes to books, is actually very, very grim, and seemingly, from the best statistical evidence we have, getting worse. So, I mean, that's just the way it is.
And compounding that is the fact that, especially within children, the ethnic diversity within children is getting bigger as well. Yeah. And so in the past, I was one of very few, even in my neighbourhood, I was one of the very few non-white kids in the school. And now, of course, I mean, especially in London, you have a very, very large mixed-race population. And children's books still aren't reflecting that, unless they're issue books. That is the one thing that I personally have a slight problem with. There are books with South Asian and Muslim protagonists within children's, but 99% of them are then dealing with some specific issue. The amount of books with Asian with a Muslim boy, it's got to be about terrorism. It's as simple as that.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of black books that are about the civil rights movement or about slavery, and those are great books to have, very important books to have. Wouldn't want to stop publishing them. But I think it's also important to have books that are about fantasy, that stretch kids' imaginations and say it's not just about dealing with these realistic, fact-based situations. It's also about showing the power to imagine things beyond your reality. I mean, that's why Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. He didn't just say, I have a couple of facts to tell you about. Yeah. Yes, back there.
I think it's a good point to mention as far as kind of moving back. What I noticed myself is that even a lot of young adults that they believe in this sort of post-racial society. And so when I was in high school, I read about Spike Lee's this director in Brooklyn named Spike Lee who was making a movie for African Americans about African Americans, and we were drawn to that. My generation was drawn to that. I guess my question to you is my impression is that also a lot of African Americans, their mindset has changed where maybe I would have been drawn to a Spike Lee and wouldn't have to listen to what book critics say or film critics say. I think today, younger generations don't really necessarily gravitate to black or white. I think they really listen to what book critics say and what movie critics say. For instance, the movie The Hunger Games, the book The Hunger Games. I never heard about it. I had a younger cousin who's African American, obviously, who was telling me about The Hunger Games, and she was down to go see the movie. It had no black actors in it.
Well, they did have Lenny Kravitz.
Very few. My point is that I think the younger generation isn't necessarily gravitating towards a book by an African American author or a film by an African American. I think they're kind of listening to what. I think they're being told what to listen to and what's possible.
Yeah, I think there's.
And that's not coming from what people are telling you to listen to, what to read, and what to watch. It's not coming from someone who looks like you or me.
Yeah, but actually, that's an interesting point. Can I slightly cross over into music, which I know you're going to be area of expertise?
But should we answer her question? She's had her hand up so patiently and so long.
Right.
And I think she has something really interesting to say.
Right.
I just sense it.
Okay, right. I'll combine the answer.
But please reward my faith.
So what were they, just from what, I don't know your name, I'm sorry. I don't know your name, I have no idea what that guy came over there. But while we were talking, I was thinking, like when I was younger, there was a lot of Jackie Chan. There was Stag Shock. Does anybody remember Stag Shock? Stag Shock is a really
he flies around on like a manhole cover or something.
Yeah, that's all I know.
Maybe they didn't come. Maybe they didn't
Sounds
appear in
cool.
Britain.
I'd be down for that. So
Yeah.
sounds good.
That was really popular when I was a kid.
Oh, do you remember Monkey? God,
You-
did
but-
you see
but-
Monkey? There was like this 1970s Hong Kong fantasy about Monkey King. It was brilliant.
But have you?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that was like,
So you're
and the
talking-
water margin. We had that in the 70s and
So you're
90s.
talking about Asian influence sort of
Well, no,
cartoons?
I just remember when I was a kid, that whole, I mean, I feel like you said, it's not a step back so much as I feel like it comes in waves.
Yeah.
Like this whole thing comes in waves. Like when I was
It-
younger, that was a big wave.
it may-
Power Rangers was a big wave. Pokemon was really important. Really
Yeah, but-
important.
Well, what comes in a wave if these things, a couple of people break through, have extraordinary talent, and there's no underlying structure to continue that progress. You know, people think that just having Spike Lee is Spike Lee's a fantastic director. John Singleton is. But unless there's sort of ways to sort of find the next one, give the next one a chance, people can greenlight their projects, whether in literature or in movies, then that wave goes away and it's
Yeah.
almost it recedes.
Actually, there's an interesting. Sorry, can I?
The reason for that is there's no feeders. There's like, if you look at racing, the highest levels all have feeder series, and the premier movies, television, and books. There's no feeder series, and that's slightly being issued with how Amazon is allowed to self-publish.
Right.
So that's allowing some feeding into the system, but and YouTube is also enabling that. But there's still no dedicated middle ground.
Well, the feeder is the Harvard Lampoon. I recommend any young writer join the Harvard Lampoon, and you too will have a kid's book
Right,
out
can
within
I
the next 3 decades.
Just tap onto your question. Right, talking about, we talked a little bit about music. Right, I got into music at the tail end of punk, yeah. And that was a
The
huge...
first wave of punk or the second wave of punk in the 90s?
First wave. I am that much older. Right. And that was as much to do with a social movement as it was about music. Yeah, that was a huge, Britain at that point was in utter economic doldrums. Yeah, so the punk was just a rebellion against everything that was going wrong. And so what was brilliant was that it had a huge amount of energy and accessed the youth movement. Oh God, that sounds such like a rubbish statement. What I find slightly worrying is that I know I'm going to get everyone disagreeing with me on this, that there doesn't seem to be that same sort of energy anymore, yeah. And, you've got great successes within the YA fiction, right? And all that generates a trend for a little while. For example, first of all, it was the paranormal romance, then it was the dystopia, etc. But what I find curious is that there is no great rebellion happening amongst youth, and what you're saying is that they are just, they're just accepting what's out there,
Right.
yeah. And I think that's a bad thing for children. I think that's a bad thing for youth to be doing. If they're not arguing with us, then they've become middle-aged way too early.
See, I'd have to disagree there. I think there's tremendous feeling out there to rebel against things that happen in society. I mean, we're not that many years away from the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Right.
People were like, something's going wrong here, let's set up some shanty towns. And I think even when we look at what happened over the last couple of days online with the hashtag activism behind hashtag we need diverse books, if you go to the Tumblr they set up, you see all these pictures of people holding up signs saying why they want more diverse books, how children's books have affected them, and the passion and the stories. It's really quite touching and quite electric, and it was all organized sort of around a new forum, social media. The passion is there. It comes and it goes.
Right.
But it is there, and the people who are hungering for new forms, new books, and books that speak to them in very deep ways.
Well, I'm glad we're going to find something to disagree over. There is pressing the button on Twitter and putting a hashtag on. It'll be interesting to see whether that generates anything beyond this weekend, because if you've been on Twitter, there's been a huge amount of people going, we need diverse books. Yeah, great. It started on Friday. Technically, tomorrow is the end of that. Yeah, and so what's what I'll be interested in seeing is what in a month, even a month's time, we'll move on to something different, and it'll all just, the wave will retreat. Yeah, maybe this is just me being cynical. I hope I am completely wrong. Yeah, but I think going on Twitter does not amount to being much of a rebellion. Seriously?
Well, how about going on Facebook?
Oh God, the like button. Yeah. Seriously? Are you that bloody lazy? Yeah. And so I mean, there's a very big difference between an artistic movement like punk and somebody doing a hashtag. Yes.
Just in response to what you were saying before about young people rebelling, I think that there is a lot of effort to try and find ways to sort of rebel and go your own way, but these days that's sort of being capitalized on. People, the media, they're recognizing the trends of people finding new ways to rebel and making them mainstream, so that it's an ongoing struggle goal to find a movement that will stick without becoming
Commercialized.
commercialized.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I completely accept these dynamics, young people. Oh God, I wish there was a better word. Young people. The dynamics of the world you live in are very different from the one that I grew up in. I'm not going to put you in the same age bracket as me. And so, yes, I accept that. And, X Factor is X Factor. We used to have opportunity knocks back in the 70s, so certain things have remained the same. But yeah, I know what you mean. Everyone thinks rebellion is cool, especially people trying to sell clothes. So,
I find, the New York Times recently published a story just about wealth inequality in America and how the middle class in the U.S. is actually not doing as well as the middle class is doing in a lot of other countries around the world, and people here might not realize that, and how wealth is being squeezed. I mean, there are many more people who are in the top 1% and many more people who are in the bottom, 50%, and what that means for the future of America. And when I go around talking to kids, even before I finished writing this book, that's very much on kids' minds in terms of wealth disparity, global warming, commercialism. These are all things that they're looking for ways to rebel against. They want to see books that address in some ways, and that's sort of one reason why I wrote this book, because that all plays a part in the plot. Because when I read Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I love those books. Don't get me wrong, but they're motivated by other things. I mean, C.S. Lewis, a lot of his book, even though he might disagree with it, motivated by his feelings about Christianity. J.R.R. Tolkien, though he might disagree, a lot of his book came out of his experiences in World War I. But we've gone through other wars since then. We're still going through some social wars now. And those are the kinds of things that kids are looking for books to sort of speak to them in certain kinds of ways. And you talked about the way in which you wanted to write a book for this certain kind of age group, because those kids are sort of discovering books on their own, not just being read to anymore. But one reason why I wanted to write a book that was for middle grade readers, kids around age 10 to 14, is because I find that's the most formative time for reading books. When you read a book at that point and it speaks to you, it speaks to you for life.
Yeah.
I mean, you're 50 years old, you're thinking back, I remember when I read The Catcher in the Rye, man, it really spoke to me. Or when I read Roots in 1977 or so, and it still speaks to me. I was really, really young then. And so it's really exciting as an author to write a book that you think is going to, really have an imprint on a kid and maybe shape their worldview or get them excited about taking some sort of action in their lives because of a book that they've read.
Yeah. I will tell you this one. The first book that I ever had published, which was Devil's Kiss, it was about a half English, half Pakistani heroine. And I went to school at the end, and this 15-year-old boy came lumbering towards me, and I'll be honest, if it had been under other circumstances, I'd probably try to cross the street. And he put the book down and said, right, it's the first book I've ever read from cover to cover. And I've never, ever had, and I don't think I'll ever get a compliment as great as that. Yeah, and all the engineering or even any writing other books. That was, I'd converted one person into a reader, and so I completely get what and it was really fantastic.
The theory is this is the last book I'll ever read, cover to cover.
Said it in a positive way. Thanks, Chris, for trampling over my dreams. Right,
We have
I
time
think.
for maybe one more question. Or?
Any other questions?
Yes.
First, a statement which is thank you, because as an educator of young children, I know how challenging it is as a reader and as an educator to find books that children feel engaged in and find themselves in. And in terms of, new mythology and people being confused, one of the things I find is that children will go back to those books. I mean, how many times have I reread A Wrinkle in Time, or have you read I'm not a big Lord of the Rings fan, I'm sorry.
What? What?
I could never see myself as, a hobbit or any of those things. But children go back, and that's a language that they learn. So as they become citizens of the world, they take these worlds and these languages with them when they engage with other people. So the work that you do is tremendously important. So for that, thank you. Secondly, a question, which is when we're talking about race and we're talking about sort of the audience of these books, I guess my concern is that books are no longer about the reading and the books. They're about, now they've sold the rights to make it into a movie, so they've become this other thing. They've become this commodified cultural thing. Like when we talk about the Hunger Games, are we talking about the books, or are we talking about the franchise? And it's wonderful that children got to reading, and children are continuing to read, but was it, but there's all the money that goes into creating certain kinds of things because we turn it into a pop culture phenomenon, and not necessarily because the people who are putting the money into it are trying to promote reading and literacy.
I want to speak to that really quickly, and then we'll probably wrap it up after you give your answer. I do think that obviously books often spawn franchises today, but there's nothing new about that. If you read the letters of J.R. Tolkien, he talks about other people that want to make his books into movies, his feelings about that, whether it should be animated or not animated, and so even back then, he was wrestling with the idea of someone taking his book to the stage or to the screen and how he felt about it. It's nothing new. What is new is often the interaction is happening sort of in real time. You see someone like George R.R. Martin, and he's blogging about what's happening on the TV show, even as he's finishing the series, and that's got to have some sort of effect on the writing of the book itself. But again, going back to something that Tolkien wrote, one reason why he thought that kids' books there really was no such thing as kids' books. He thought that they were just books. But why writing fairy stories, as he called them, was so important was because you're creating whole worlds. It's something beyond like writing sort of the normal adult book. You're creating a whole world for people to live in and exist in. And there's something about that act that's closer to the act of creation that you see in Genesis than any other kind of book you might write. And so I think it's a natural progression from that to move from beyond someone creating a whole world for you to exist in and explore, to creating video games spun off of that, and movies and series. That just seems to make sense because there's something powerful about these kinds of stories, these kinds of fantasy stories, whether it's George R.R. Martin or J.R.R. Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or J.K. Rowling. When you can create a whole world for people to live in, it makes sense that people are going to come to that world and move in and start doing stuff and set up shop because that's what the world was built there to do. So I welcome that kind of stuff. I think it's fun to do. I've sold some books to the movies. Nothing been made yet, but it was an interesting process. And it's something that people struggled with for years. James Baldwin tried to make movies, and so did Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. It doesn't always work out, but it's something authors have been dealing with for a long time, but more so with fantasy authors because they're creating these whole universes for people to live in.
Look how difficult it was for Ender's Game to get into a movie.
Right,
Ender's Game, yeah,
including the guy's comments about gay marriage, which complicated it even more.
Yeah. I don't know if... Right. Okay. there are going to be writers that inevitably are writing something because they've got the movie franchise in their minds. And there are inevitably going to be writers, oh gosh, yeah, really, really early on I went to a writing workshop and the guy was writing, do you have Paddington Bear here?
Yeah.
Right, so he was a fan of Paddington Bear and Mr. Men and all of that. And so he was wanting to create a children's series where basically he'd already drawn out all the dolls. Yeah. And so there are many wrong reasons to get into writing. I mean, I don't think he succeeded because I've not seen any of these dolls. But I think since day one, I bet you Homer was, he wrote some, he was like there talking about the Iliad, and then somebody was like saying, oh, I'm going to like paint a picture of it, or a comic strip, or something
Or
like
someone
that.
wrote it down because it only existed in oral
Exactly,
form.
yeah,
So
exactly.
How dare they commodify him in that way, write it down?
However, these two worlds are to a degree separate because the fan base of one does not necessarily generate success in the other. Because, we've had Twilight, we've had the Hunger Games, but we've had quite a few others that have kind of like crashed and burned. And so the reading fan base has not in itself been enough to sustain. I mean, I must admit, I've not seen the films, whether they're good or bad or indifferent. So it's not something that ever concerns me particularly. It's a good book, and I might have enjoyed it. Like, I loved The Hunger Games as books, but I've never actually got around to seeing the movies because I just wasn't really that, that bothered. But I've read all the Bond books and I've seen all the Bond movies. That's probably the closest I've come to literary and cinematic, crossover. But the crossovers are inevitable, but my answer is so what? It doesn't really matter, frankly.
Should we leave it?
I think we're going to have to end there.
Thank you everyone for
Yes,
coming.
thank you very much.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We'll be around. Thanks.